Welcome back, math friends. Today we're taking a look at integers and balloons to help us discuss what it's like to subtract integers. So we're going to try to use helium balloons and weights to explain why integers do what they do. And so if you can see off to the left here, I've got my diagram with a helium balloon and a little bucket or a cup down below. And we're going to get started. So, how are integers and balloons alike? Well, we're going to find out. Now, your positive integers are like helium balloons. Okay, your positive integers, helium balloons. When you add a positive integer, the value increases, or it goes up, right? So make sure you write this down. Add a positive integer, the value increases, or it goes up. So, if I were to add, let's say I'm going to add 3 helium balloons to my diagram. 1, got a green one, 2, and a purple one, and 3. Okay, I've added 3 balloons. What's going to happen to my balloons? Well, let's see here. What you should expect to happen is that the balloons will go up. So, I had 1 helium balloon, I added 3 more, so it went up to 4. And that makes sense because, well, 1 plus 3 equals 4, right? Okay, but what happens then when we take away helium balloons? Well, if helium balloons are like positive integers, if we take away a balloon, then the value will decrease. So subtract a positive integer and the value decreases. So I'm going to subtract one of my helium balloons. Whoops, I accidentally subtracted 2. There we go. And what happens? You can see that by subtracting one of the helium balloons, the whole thing went down from 4 to 3. Well, and that makes sense, right? Because we are subtracting a balloon. So 4 minus 1 balloon equals 3. Okay, great. Now, but what about negative integers? That's great. Positive integers. You guys have been working with positive integers ever since you've been learning about math. But what happens with negative integers? So negative integers, they aren't balloons. They're like weights that you would add to the situation. So if you were to add a negative integer, the value will decrease, right? Because we would expect if we were to put a weight in our cup here, what would happen to our balloon situation? It would all go down, right? So when you add a negative integer, the value decreases, which is the same thing as subtracting a positive integer. It's just like popping a balloon or getting rid of a balloon. Adding a weight is just like taking away a balloon. So I'm going to add a weight. There we go. Put a weight in the cup. And what happened? So by adding a weight, adding a negative integer, it caused the entire situation to go down. So our value goes down. I was at 3, then I added a weight, which is a negative 1. And what happened? I ended up at 2. Well, that's the same thing as saying, well, then 3 minus 1 equals 2. So it's the same thing as subtracting a positive. Adding a negative is just like subtracting a positive. What if I added 3 more weights? Let's do that. I'm going to add 3 more. 1, 2, 3 more weights to my cup. So let's see, I'm sitting at 2, and then I add 3 more negatives. What's that going to do? Well, as you can see, by adding 3 more negatives, right, that dropped it down to negative 1. So 2 plus negative 3 equals negative 1. And that would be the same thing as 2 minus 3 equals negative 1. Okay, so that's when we add negatives, it causes the value to go down. You can see the balloon situation is further down from where it was. Okay? So, now, what do we do when we subtract negatives? What do you think is going to happen if I subtract weights from the cup? Which direction will the whole balloon scenario move if I subtract negatives? So subtracting a negative integer is the same thing as taking the weights away. That would cause the value to increase, because if you take the weights out of the cup, the balloon will rise. It's not going to go down, it will rise. So let's say that I take one of these weights away. What will happen? Okay, as you can see, I took one of the weights away, and the cup, instead of sitting at negative 1, it is now at 0. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that when I was at negative 1, sorry about the jumpiness there of the video, when I was at negative 1 and I subtracted negative 1, that put me at 0. And that would be the same thing as adding 1. So negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Oh, that doesn't. There we go. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So that's the same thing as subtracting negative 1. Adding 1. All right, now I'm going to take away 2 more weights. So I'm going to subtract 2 more weights. I'm going to subtract 2 more negatives. Subtract that one and that one. Oops, looks like I got rid of part of my cup. Okay, what will that do? Well, now you can see in the diagram that the cup went up 2 more with the balloons because I subtracted 2 more weights. So, I was at 0, and I subtracted 2 negatives, and that put me at 2. So that means that 0 minus negative 2 is the same thing as adding 2. 0 plus 2 equals 2. So what I want you to really come away from this with is the idea that when we subtract, oh, and don't forget that we need to highlight, or sorry, you need to copy this down, subtract a negative integer, and the value increases, which is the same thing as adding a positive integer. Okay, so what do you need to take away from all this? When we subtract integers, subtracting integers is the same. Highlight this, I'm going to copy this down. Subtracting integers is the same as adding the additive inverse, or remember what additive inverse is? That's the opposite. So subtracting integers is the same thing as adding the opposite. So, let's take a look at some examples using just a plain old number line. 6 minus 4. Now you guys know what 6 minus 4 is. That's easy. But let's take a look at it on a number line situation. First of all, we're going to change this subtraction to adding the opposite. Okay? So 6 minus 4 is the same thing as 6 plus the opposite of 4 is negative 4. Take a minute, let that soak in, okay? 6 minus 4, the same as 6 plus negative 4. So here's what we do. On a number line, remember, we always start at 0. Always start at 0. So I go first to 6. Go into 6. All right. There's 6. And now I'm going to add negative 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And where does that leave me? That's right, it leaves me at 2. Now we knew that 6 minus 4 is 2, but I'm just trying to prove that adding the opposite is the same thing as subtracting. 6 minus 4 is 2, 6 plus negative 4 is 2. They're the exact same thing. Okay? Let's take a look at another example. 6 minus 9. Okay? Adding the opposite. 6 minus 9 is the same thing as 6 plus the opposite of 9 is negative 9. 6 plus negative 9. Let's use our number line. Make sure you're copying all this down. Start at 0. I'm going to go to 6. So starting at 0, going to 6. Okay, there's my 6. And now I'm going to add negative 9. That means I'm going to move to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Minus 9. Adding negative 9. That puts me at negative 3. So 6 plus negative 9 equals negative 3. All right? Adding the opposite. Subtraction is adding the opposite. I'm going to try one more that has a couple of negatives in it, all right? This is going to be a good one. Remember, subtraction is adding the opposite. So, negative 3 minus negative 5 is negative 3 plus the opposite of negative 5 is 5. So negative 3 minus negative 5 is negative 3 plus 5. So going to the number line, starting at 0. From 0, I'm going to go to negative 3. Okay, there I am at negative 3. And then I'm going to add 5 from there. And I'm adding a positive 5. That means I go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plus 5. Okay, and where does that put me? Right at 2. So negative 3 minus negative 5 is the same as negative 3 plus 5, and that equals 2. Subtraction is adding the opposite. That is huge. Subtraction is adding the opposite, or the additive inverse, if you want to have fancy math terms. Adding the opposite. So, you need to remember that first number stays the same. Negative 3 stayed the same. But we're going to change subtraction to addition, like we did here. And then we change the second number to its opposite. Adding the opposite. That's what subtraction is. Okay, now, good luck on the practice work. If you have any questions, reach out to your teacher. And we'll see you next time. Don't forget to be awesome.